And so today we do enter into the season of Advent and an Advent series that we are calling All is Calm, All is Bright. Those 6 words could be an affirmation we can hold in our hearts and use on just about any day at any time, and especially in a year such as the one 2020 has been. Those words serve as a reminder that in the midst of what we would place into a category of darkness, there is always calm. There is always a light that shines as brightly as our awareness allows it to do. We saw this interplay of dark and light in our opening prayer at the beginning of the service today. We experienced the troubling news of significant challenges being experienced by people very, very dear to us. And then we watched a young child just exude the light of spirit as she expressed with such innocence and purity and calm and joy. For me, when she closed her eyes and just placed her little hand over her heart for just a split second, that's when that light shone at its brightest. The same interplay can be seen on our calendar. We're entering into the darkness and light as it pertains to the upcoming winter solstice, a time when we experience the longest hours of darkness, and then what is often referred to as a rebirth of the sun. And of course, the interplay of darkness and light is present in the season of Advent. And I'll come back to that in a moment or two. But first, let's just look at Advent in general, what it is, what it represents. And the season itself has been celebrated since the 5th century of this common era of ours. And Christian tradition notes that it's the time falling in the 4 weeks before Christmas Day, the 4 weeks before the birth of the Christ child. From a metaphysical perspective, those 4 weeks are really a time of expectation and a time of preparation. There is an expectation of experiencing the presence of that Christ, of God's presence in us, and to do so at a greater capacity than ever before. And we take time preparing for that. We spend time making room in our lives so that the highest awareness possible of that truth, that indeed we are spiritual beings, can make itself known in us. There's a bit of a back and forth, in play here. Maybe if you imagine, the arc of a pendulum as it goes back and forth, it goes from one end to the other, sometimes slowly, other times much more quickly. And that back and forth, it's going to continue until we stop it, So overlay that to this Christmas season that we are now in, or perhaps have been in, if before today, if we've already started our shopping and decorating and baking and preparing and so forth. There can be times in this Christmas season we are just all in. We are filled with excitement and anticipation. Our hearts are filled with joy. We've got the Christmas music playing in our homes or as we drive in our cars. And then there can also be times in this Christmas season when our hearts are heavy. Perhaps this year, due to our not being able to safely gather with as many family and friends as we've done in the past. Or perhaps because of challenges in our lives, or because of any number of reasons that this holiday can bring up memories that are those that are filled with sorrow or loss. One of my best friends for 23 years died just a couple of days before Christmas back in 2004. And I received word just late this past Wednesday night that someone very, very dear to me back in Kansas City had passed away. And so part of my Christmas each year has these elements of sorrow and loss. In order to know at depth that all is calm, that all is bright, we ask ourselves, how do we stop the pendulum? How do we stop that pendulum and bring it, which is representative of bringing ourselves back to center, back to stillness, back to calm? From our opening prayer experience today, Cindy and Jerry and Joanne, they stopped and they asked for prayer. Our toddler conductor, she stopped paying attention to all those, much bigger people all around her. She stopped for a moment, closed her eyes, put her little hand on her heart. And in that split second, all that it was that lasted, I imagine that she was no longer of this world, that she and spirit were exactly one and the same in total, right there. So in this season of Advent, where can we look for an interplay of dark and light? Where can we find our own ways of standing so strongly in our faith and bring ourselves back to a center of calm and a place of that divine light in us? Well, today we're going to turn first to Theodore Roosevelt, and then we're going to turn the pages of Scripture to the Christmas story. And while that might seem at first to be a kind of an odd combination, it really isn't. I had come across some commentary from Mr. Roosevelt in my planning files, and as I read it, what he said spoke to me about faith, and did so in such a way to support our theory of interplay today, of the dark and the light. But the word faith was not mentioned by him at all, and I didn't know if he had been a religious man or not. So when I did some checking about that, I found that he indeed was a very religious man all his life. He was a practicing Christian. He was a student and scholar of Scripture, so much so that he once said that a thorough knowledge of the Bible is worth more than a college education. He felt that the Bible contained spiritual truths that deserved to be lived. To be lived, not words on a page that you close the books and put it back on the shelf. Those words to him deserved to be lived. And so the commentary that spoke to me about faith reads, "It is not the critics who count, nor the people who point out how the strong have stumbled, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to those who are actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strive valiantly, who know great enthusiasm and great devotion and spend themselves in worthy causes, who at best know the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if they fail, at least fail while daring greatly, so that their place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory or defeat." So in his words, the interplay is shutting out all the outer chatter and just listening to those calls from within, stepping into the unknown, where there might be grand achievement, there might be utter failure, or possibly both of them for a time before all is said and done. Not seeing achievement as having done something right and failure as doing something wrong, but rather valiantly staying the course and daring greatly. Perhaps that's another way to define living one's faith. So let's see how this is depicted in some of the characters of the scriptural Christmas story of Jesus' birth. That story has within it such a diverse group of characters in it. We have men and women. We have people who were rich and poor. We have people who were Jews and those who were Arabs. We have two-legged as well as four-legged characters, if you count the animals in the field and those at the stable. All of them were asked to live their faith, because all of them were asked to step so far outside of their comfort zones, of what they knew. Mary was an unmarried, pregnant virgin. Now that right there is so not a comfort zone in so many different ways, right? And beyond that, in her 9th month of pregnancy, she gets this guidance, this inner guidance telling her to get up on a donkey and ride for days and miles to give birth to that child. It was a huge leap of faith for her to step away from all that she knew into all that she couldn't understand. And then, of course, there's Joseph. He too had to call upon great faith in order to become so blindly obedient to events, angelic forces, and more that he could not begin to know or understand. It was faith that supported him in risking the shame of marrying a woman who was pregnant with a child that was not his, and also making that very same journey to be present for that child's birth. And what about our shepherds? All they were asked to do was leave their jobs. Just walk away from your jobs, no questions asked. Walk away from your very livelihood. And why? To go see a baby. Many had been fired for much reason, or for much less reason than that. But these shepherds were being asked to step out of their comfort zones in faith. In every single one of these characters, they dared to do so. They dared to step outside of their comfort zones, and in doing so, they then were living their faith. Another calling to live one's faith that we can see in our scripture story is the one that was placed upon the hearts of the Magi. And there's interplay at work here between their outer personas, being wealthy, educated, refined individuals, and that of the mysterious. See, these were people who typically relied upon scholarship and status and position for how they lived and expressed their lives. But now in our story, they're being called into the mystery of life. And it's a calling that was made to them in the form of a star high up in the night sky. A star that told them that they were to travel for miles across the desert to honor what could only be referred to as a spiritual birth, and one taking place within a people of whom they were not a part. And if we're going to talk about the mysterious, well, then let's not forget about the angels. An angel broke the news of this virgin pregnancy to the maiden Mary. An angel told Joseph, take that story in, don't be afraid of it. Trust in the news and still take Mary as your wife. And it was the angels that were singing to a lot of very confused shepherds on the hillside. But they did all of these things because it was what they were called to do. And so the interplay between these characters can also seem to be more along the lines of moving back and forth between what they knew and what they were being invited to believe. Sometimes when we think about Christmas and this Christmas story, we go right to the space of seeing it as being something that is filled with peace and hope and love and joy. But in reality, it wasn't those things from the start. From the start of this story, it was messy. It was messy. And there was not an immediate and joyful buy-in from all of these different characters involved. They resisted. They asked questions. They doubted. They didn't believe. And then once they actually took some steps into what was in their inner calls, they still had parts of the process that were very scary and arduous. And many of the steps were not known far in advance of being asked to take them. See, the bliss and the delight, it came in bits and pieces. And it really didn't all come together into complete fullness until the end of the story. It was at the end of the story, with the birth of Jesus, that all and every one was finally calm. That all and everything was finally bright. That was their story. And when we speak metaphysically of Scripture, we say that those Bible stories, they are our life stories today. And that means that we take those stories of old and we put ourselves into the shoes of every one of the characters and see how their stories can be applied to our lives in this world today. And so this morning, on this first week of Advent, we can begin to kind of set the stage for doing just that in our time of preparation. So think about your life. Think about what's going on in it. Think about what you might want to do or achieve or experience. Or maybe you're at a place where none of that is even clear. But because it's this time of the season, this time of expectation, you're willing to open up to the possibilities of what could be. If we would overlay the Christmas story on each and every one of you, we would see today as being that initial internal nudge to go towards what will become your quote unquote Bethlehem of today, your final destination. We would see each of you as being pregnant with a spark of the divine that has been ignited from you and ignited in you, from which will come forth this beautiful new creative expression of God being brought into this world. And since none of our stories today are at their end, as we gather together this morning, there's a good likelihood that some of us may be in the midst of the dark and the light interplay at work. I found a great phrase to describe that, and that is call it creative confusion. Creative confusion. See, there is a creativity that may go back and forth between those pendulum arcs of joy and grief, or love and fear, or doubt and faith, maybe all at once, maybe all in the course of one day, maybe in the midst of a specific challenge or a particular experience. And the confusion, in the creative confusion, well, that can take the form of resistance and denial, non-belief, frustration, impatience. But the hidden jewel in creative confusion is knowing that the experience of it, like Mr. Roosevelt said, it does not mean that we are doing anything wrong. In fact, it means the exact opposite. It means that we are doing exactly what we have been called to do. And just like the characters of old, we may not know exactly what that is all the time, but we continue on in faith. We're trusting that new spark of light in us. It will make its way into this world in its own and always perfect timing. The darkness goes along for the ride, but the light is guaranteed. I found that comment in Unity's Advent booklet from back in 2015, which also provided some inspiration for today's lesson. It spoke to me in terms of what Mr. Roosevelt said about his beliefs that spiritual truths found in Scripture, they are deserving of being lived. Now, we often say or hear others say that there are no guarantees in life. And perhaps that's true as it pertains to our human life. But the light that is God, that is Spirit, that is absolutely guaranteed. And faith as a living practice in our lives, that's what enables us to return to it over and over and time again, return to that light and follow where it leads us. Every time that we do, that divine spark that ignites in us, those divine sparks that make up the stories of our lives today as we birth them into being, it got us closer and closer to that spiritual center within us, that place where the pendulum stops. The pendulum stops and announces our arrival at our Bethlehem, where all is calm and all is bright. God bless you.